Question number 12, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Trade. Does the provision at page 8 of Annex II of the New Zealand-South Korea FTA mean South Korea can adopt or maintain a ban on New Zealand people buying South Korean homes?
The Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is the reason that Minister Grosser wouldn't answer that same question last week because he didn't know, or was it because it shows up his government's incompetence in giving up New Zealand's right to ban foreign buyers of New Zealand homes while agreeing that South Korea can?
Mr Speaker,
the Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, no. New Zealand has applied a consistent approach to this issue in all FTAs. I understand that the Minister followed exactly the same strategy as the then Trade Minister Phil Goff used with the China FTA negotiation. Mr Speaker, the outcome is exactly the same in both the China and Korea FTAs. They're both high-quality agreements. They both deliver jobs and investment for New Zealanders, and they both treat property transactions the same. Mr Parker needs to talk to Mr Goff.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Order. 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 I have order. Order. I have a point of order from the Honourable David Parker.
I seek leave to table the relevant pages of the free trade agreement with China under which New Zealand can ban foreign purchases from China.
Again, that information is very available to all members if they want to go and look it up.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
A point of order. This is a free point of order?
It is. No, okay. It's speaking to that point of order, sir.
Well, I'll hear very briefly from the member, but...
Mr Speaker, the free trade agreement with China runs to many thousands of pages, as most free trade agreements do. It's very difficult for members, obviously the Minister, to find the relevant clause, and so I think it is helpful to the Clade.
I've heard enough. I will accept the member's first point. I'll put the leave of the House. It'll be the House decide. The member wants to table the relevant pages regarding this issue in the China FTA. Is there any objection? There is none. He can do so. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Is the Minister saying that under the free trade agreement signed with China, that agreement stops the New Zealand government banning the sale of New Zealand homes to foreigners, including China?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, what I'm saying is the approach of the China Free Trade Agreement negotiation and the Korea Free Trade Agreement negotiation are the same. And the outcome is the same. But in this respect, Mr Question, in respect of the primary question, the government had a number of priorities it negotiated. Preserving sensitive land provisions under the OIA, we were successful in this. Ensuring that there were no adverse changes to the foreign investment provisions, we were successful in this. Treaty of Waitangi exemptions were done. A good deal for New Zealand exporters to create opportunities and jobs in New Zealand and grow the economy was done, and to ensure the outcome of equal standing to the China FTA on that issue. This too was successful.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Does New Zealand have a history of unilaterally dropping trade barriers, and if so, to what effect and under which parties?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McLeay,
Well,
either of those two supplementaries.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, one of the challenges New Zealand exporters face is barriers to trade. These high-quality free trade agreements that have been entered into by successive New Zealand governments open up access, they level the playing field, they allow New Zealanders to produce and export, they secure jobs for New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, these are two good free trade agreements, and Mr Parker voted in favour of both of them. He should be proud of that.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Given that countries like Australia, Switzerland and China have bans on the sale of their homes to foreigners, why did he not even try to protect New Zealand's sovereign right to do the same?
The Honourable Todd McLeay.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, there are a range of policy options available to the government depending upon the circumstances. But no, a ban wouldn't be consistent, Mr Speaker. A ban wouldn't be consistent with the closer economic relations agreement with Australia. It wouldn't be consistent with the Singapore, the China, the Korea or the Taiwan FTAs. The same is exactly, Mr Speaker, this is exactly the same, the Korea agreement, a high-quality agreement, as previous agreements that have been negotiated by governments.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Is he still asserting that the Chinese Free Trade Agreement prevents the New Zealand government from introducing a ban on the sale of residential homes to foreigners?
The Honourable Todd McRae.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I refer to my earlier answers. One thing, though, which is clear in the text that the member...
Order. Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
I've answered that question in 3 forms, and he hasn't answered it on the prior...
I was hoping the way forward is I'm going to invite the member to restate that question, and then this time we do hope we get an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable David Parker.
Is the Minister still asserting that the provisions of the Chinese Free Trade Agreement prevent the New Zealand government from imposing a ban on the sale of New Zealand homes to foreigners?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McRae.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, what I am asserting is that the approach to the negotiating of those 2 agreements and the outcome is the same.
Wrong. You're just wrong.
A point of order, the Honourable Amy Adams.
Leave to correct an answer given in question time earlier today.
Leave is sought to make to correct that. Is there any objection to that course of action? Order. Is there any objection? There is none. The Honourable Amy Adams.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to a supplementary question 10 today, it's been brought to my attention that my answer may have indicated that the $50 million mobile black spot fund is in addition to the $450 million this government is spending on rural connectivity. It is in fact included in that $450 million.
Point of order.
Point of order. Order. Point of order, Dennis O'Rourke.
Concerning Standing Order 3862C, which refers to, and I quote, discreditable references to the House or any member of Parliament, may I respectfully request that you reflect upon whether any of your rulings today were not consistent with standing orders.
Order. And I've already given an assurance earlier to Chris Hipkins asking that I do reflect. I will do so. Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to move without notice a motion of no confidence in you as the Speaker as a result of your rulings today.
Leave us sought for that course of action. Is there any objection?
Yes, there is.
Order. Have we got a point of order from James Shaw?
Point of order, yes, Mr.
Point
Speaker.
of order, James Shaw.
In relation to Speaker's ruling 61.1, Mr. Speaker, which reads, the cause for a matter to be withdrawn in the House is not that one member feels aggrieved. A member is required to withdraw because the House itself is affronted. You referred to this in your earlier ruling. It says not one. How many members would need to feel affronted before you ruled that it would be affronting the House?
Order. And there is no formula I can give the member that may help in a future situation. I've got to judge the tone of the questions that have been asked, the tone of the answers that have been given, and then make a call. And there is no formula I can give about whether it's 4 that rise to do so. Often we get a case, in fact I can think of numerous cases where a member says he's taken offence. I rule that that's, in my mind, not a matter of offence, and 3 or 4 other, almost in an orchestrated campaign, will rise to try and join. That's happened before in the past. I make a call depending on the circumstance. As I was explained, as I've said to this House, I will certainly review the proceedings earlier today. A fresh point of order?
Well, in relation to
No, we've spent a lot of time on this matter. I've dealt with it. If the member has a fresh point of order, I'm only too happy to hear that. But at this time, I've dealt with this other matter. That concludes questions for oral answer. Order.